Disclaimer, warning: this creepypasta has depiction of suicide, self-harm, and gore and not suitable for some viewers. And if you are in need of suicide prevention, please call 988 or go to https://988lifeline.org/. All rights go to the author. Please support the official release. Godzilla Creepypasta, Chapter 1, Earth and Mars.
When I was a little kid, the two things I loved most in life were Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Godzilla Monsters of Monsters came out, it was like a dream come true. Well, almost. To sum it up, most of the game revolves around getting through some very repetitive outer space levels while smashing up tanks, jets, and fighting against Godzilla's monster enemies. Overall, it was pretty mediocre. But back then, I didn't care. When I got the game as a present for my 10th birthday, I played it day and night, as much as I could. Unfortunately, I had traded the game for Amagon a year later. Much to my regret, I had found out what the game was really like. Recently, I had bought a new NES system, and through a lot of hunting and asking around, my friend Billy finally managed to get a copy of Godzilla Monsters of Monsters. I was pumped to play my favorite childhood game. It never occurred to me to ask where Billy found it. He also gave me some other games like Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and some stupid game called Action 52, but Godzilla had to come first. So I started the game, and nostalgia came flooding back like a tidal wave. Godzilla's 8-bit theme song flooded proudly through the speakers, and I was soon grinning like an idiot. Some people laugh at me for playing such outdated games, and I've never had as much enjoyment for any games other than those on NES. Those 8-bit games take me back to when things were much simpler, more safe. But after what happened with this game, I don't have those feelings anymore. I had forgotten how quickly the fun of smashing things as Godzilla wore off in a scrolling level. The game bombards you with some bullets and things crashing into you from every direction, and you're too big to avoid most of them. Although my excitement had worn down some, it wasn't long at all before I got to my first boss battle. My first opponent was Ghidorah, an obscured squid kaiju, who had never been in a Godzilla movie. The most annoying thing about fighting Ghidorah is that he always backs you in a corner and starts smacking you with his tentacles, and you're unable to move until he gets off you. This move doesn't do any damage, but it can stall you until the timer runs out and you have to start the fight over, and you regain some health. It's annoying as it sounds, and of course he did it when I fought him, only for some reason this caused the game to glitch up, because once he starts smacking me, he never stopped. The timer was supposed to end the fight in about 40 seconds, but this lasted for nearly 5 minutes. After a while, the graphics started to mess up, with little red blocks all over the place. Which was weird, but I just took the game out, blew on it, and then started it up again. I wasn't about to let a little glitch stand in the way, so I started again, and this time, defeat Ghidorah and the levels of the other boss monster, Mogra, without any problems. So then it was on to the next planet, Mars. I browsed around the board and found something unexpected. Where Varan's piece should have been, there was instead a piece representing Titasaurus. There were only 10 kaijus in the game, and Titasaurus was not one of them, or so I thought. Perhaps Titasaurus was originally intended to be in the game, but was swapped out with Varan for some reason? So I began to feel very excited. Not only was I playing my favorite game, but I was playing a prototype of some sort with new monsters. Needless to say, I ran through the level as fast as I could to see Titasaurus in action. I fought Godzilla again and beat him before he could do the tentacle smack, but this time the glitch started happening when he died. Godzilla's sprite didn't sink to the bottom, but instead seemed to devour by the glitch, and his eyes started randomly swapping all over the screen. I know now these glitches with Godzilla were my first warning signs that something was very wrong with this game, but foolishly I ignored it, and proceeded to fight Magura, who this time had a glitch of its own. Magura was twice the size he should have been, which startled me. He was also considerably harder to beat than usual, which is to say not at all, but soon I had defeated him also, and when he died, yet another glitch happened. This happened extremely fast, so I was lucky to get a screen cap of all of it. But what happened was that the giant Magura sprite started to shatter and melt. Also, if you look at the garbled text at the right corner of the screen, you'll notice what appears to be a bird in a cage. I still have no idea what that meant. At this point, I was about to fight Titasaurus. As I was worried to what kind of glitches would happen this time, to my surprise, Titasaurus looked just fine. Although all of the game's bipedal monsters were the same height, Titasaurus was a bit taller, but since Titasaurus actually was taller than Godzilla in his film debut, I thought this was kinda cool. After a very fun fight, the monster that wasn't supposed to be in the game, I took over the enemy base and proceeded not to Jupiter like normal, but instead to Pathos.
Chapter 2 Pathos.
Pathos was the same as Jupiter in layout, except the board was dark blue rather than green. The first thing I noticed was that all the usual level icons had been replaced by a blue rock and some kind of orange honeycomb shape. There was an icon that had part of the jungle icon shape. I didn't pay much attention to it though. I checked the other side of the board to see the new monster. Instead of Hedorah, it was Biollante. But that couldn't be right. Godzilla vs. Biollante didn't come out until 1989, and this game was made in 1988. Perhaps Toho put Biollante in the game to build excitement for the movie next year, but changed their minds? I tried to rationalize the game's amoralities any way I could, but this would prove to be futile. Pathos Map Song was the very first new song I heard in the game. Like most of the new songs, it was hard to describe, but I'll try. It started out slow and suspenseful, much slower than any song in the game, but every 12 seconds or so there would be a loud crashing sound, and the tempo would change. It was like the composer randomly played parts from the 5 different songs with the same instrument. I moved Godzilla over to one of the many blue rock icons that replaced the jungle icon, and started the level. The level resembled a blue mountain range with a blood-red planet in the sky, but there was something odd about that mountain. They had shredded paper look to them. I thought at first maybe it was a glitch that affected it, but it looked far way too intentional. I quickly noticed something else about this new level. There was no enemies at all. Not even any obstacles. I should also mention that this was where the point meter started to become a glitch beyond comprehension, but it didn't bother me much. I never kept up with the game points. So without having to focus on anything, I listened to the music while walking through the level unopposed. The music had a sorrowful feel to it. It would have been rather pleasant had I heard it in a normal game. The level went on for 3 screens, but with no obstacles around, I finished it very quickly. I tried other levels of the same type to see if any enemies would appear, but there were none. There was little else to be seen in Blue Mountains, so I tried the other level types. I started one of the orange levels, and my eyes were assaulted with a grotesque background of tumorous orange eyes. The sky was like the same as the ground, so I assumed the game was indicating that this level takes place in a cave. The only enemies were Matango spawns, but as you can see, the little bastards were everywhere. The music certainly didn't help, with the mixtures of screeching sounds and loud drums beat like the sound of a monster's theme in a horror film. After completing it, I tried to avoid playing through any more of the levels whenever I could. The map was short, so it was only a few minutes before I headed towards a rematch with Godzilla and Magara, but this time their sprites and attack patterns were vastly different. I fought Magara first. Magara's replacement was a flying machine with a slight resemblance to a Baskagula alien. It was a bit like fighting Mothra, only it moved with a lot more grace. It attacked by spinning in its front tentacles like a corkscrew. And it still had an I-beam, except now it fired from the drill. This lanky aberration had replaced Godzilla, and the new beast was more of a challenge. It would run and jump as fast pace, consistently swinging its arms around, making it hard to get close. And of course, it tried to pin me in the corner with as much annoying resolve as ever. I defeated it, using a combination of tail whip and heat beam spamming. I defeated them and was going to fight Titasaurus, but when I started the fight, Titasaurus was nowhere to be seen, and the game simply went back to the map, with the Titasaurus piece now missing. There was no one left to fight now but Biollante, so I eagerly started the battle. I was quite surprised that Biollante started the fight in her rose form. She was immobile and used tentacles to keep me away from the main body, which took the most damage. As expected, she turned into her final form after taking enough damage. The sprite looked pretty damn good for 8-bit. The battle technique was the same, except now Biollante could move. I'll bet slower than any other monster. Being hit by the tentacles did more damage now, and Biollante could do a acid spit, which I managed to avoid by jumping in the screen cap. Not much more difficult to beat than Titasaurus, it only took 2 rounds, but when Biollante was gone, the music had stopped, and there was now a new icon replacing the base. This icon wasn't there before. I beat Biollante. It resembled a red tribal mask, and I had a feeling of dread when I saw it. But since it replaced the base, it must be the only way to exit Pathos. I moved Godzilla to the square and started the level. It was a hellish looking place with no sky, and a flickering fire in the background. The fire looked as far more advanced than anything I've seen on the NES. There was music in the form of a slow, steady drum sound resembling a heartbeat. All the text on the top of the screen and the life bar were gone. In their place was a single bit of text in the middle of the screen that said, "Run." My feelings of dread had intensified. I cautiously walked through the level, but like the Blue Mountains, there were no enemies. I paced around for a minute before thinking, run? From what? The first time it hit me, I didn't even see it. I heard a noise outside my room and turned back to see if something fell. And when I looked back, Godzilla was dying. I figured it must have just been a glitch, but I wasn't going to play through the game without Godzilla, so I restarted the game and went to the password screen. Have I mentioned how creepy the password screen music is? If you played the game, you know what I mean. It doesn't at all fit the mood of the game. It's more like something from a horror game. Maybe they made it like that so kids wouldn't cheat. I was quite annoyed at this point, because I thought I was going to have to fight all the monsters again, but that didn't happen. The game started me off right where I was before I started the red face level. So I tried again, making sure to pay attention this time. That's when I heard a low bellowing sound, and then I saw it. This thing. Do you know that feeling your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as your adrenaline flows through your veins and your nerves start to feel very cold. That's the feeling I had when I took the screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla movies, but I'm pretty damn sure this was never any of them. It had to be something of this creator made up. But what kind of sick fuck would put this in a children's game? By sheer dumb luck, or perhaps the adrenaline boost, I managed to run fast enough to get away from it. It ran very fast, so much so that if you saw it, you were almost certainly going to die. And when I say die, I mean your monster gets killed instantly if this creature touches them. Once I had got back to the map, I was so afraid that I was extremely tempted to just shut off the game and try to pretend this never happened. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen. It couldn't have been real. And even if I wanted to continue, I still had to get Mothra through the chase level. But as I stayed inactive on the map screen for a few minutes, my fear was replaced by burning curiosity. What the hell just happened? What was the rest of the game like? I only had to beat the level with Mothra, and then it was into the next world. But when I moved Mothra to the red face, the game registered it as me beating the level. I was quite relieved. I tried to prepare myself for the next world. Trance.
Chapter 3 Trance.
I was pretty still shooken up from the last level when I started Trance. Trance map music did nothing to ease the tension. As for how to describe it, have you ever heard the theme from Videodrome? That's the closest thing I can think of it to compare it to. I checked to see who's the new monster was, and it was Orga, a monster who didn't make his film debut until 2000. Appearing in a game made in 1988, so much for my theory about Titasaurus and Biollante. There's no way this game was modeled in 1988. Those guys at Toho must be smart, but I'm pretty sure they couldn't see that far into the future. If they could, they never would have gave Roland Emmerich the rights to make Godzilla movie. No, this has to be a hack of some kind, which just opened up more questions. Who made this hack? How? When? And most importantly, why? The why? Was the question that bothered me the most. My immediate assumption was to think Billy did this to pull a prank on me, but this couldn't be right either. Billy didn't know how to make a ROM hack. And if he did, he'd probably just do something simple as stupid, just like replacing all the monsters with crudely drawing genitalia. Unless Billy had amazing game editing skills and serious dark stakes to his imagination that he never told me about, He couldn't have made this. Is it even possible to put a ROM hack in the cartridge? Aside from all that, my eyes was drawn to a new icon on the map. A question mark. I was really curious as to what it did. I'm sure you're also curious, so I'll explain the quiz levels. Now, since this was when they started appearing, there was one of them per map from here on, and they always appeared near the start of the map. When you start a quiz level, you'll appear on the screen like this. As you can see, there's a question at the top, a yes and no button, and the emotion con in the center. I refer the emotion con as face. Real creative, I know. And for convenience, I'll refer the face as the one who's asking the questions. The music for the quiz level was a track actually in the game. It's the one that plays when you try to use the Ghidorah cheat and sent to an unplayable level. Face asks you 12 yes or no questions, and you move your monsters to the buttons for your answers. And when you answer, the question disappears and the face changes expressions for about 8 seconds, and then it goes back to a neutral and new question comes up. There was no time limit, nor any right or wrong answers. Face has no respect for players' personal boundaries, and will sometimes ask deeply disturbing and personal questions. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever killed or AR'd someone? Have you been molested by your family member? Other times he would ask questions that were either mind-humbling stupid, is the sun hot, is the water wet? Or just flat out ridiculous, does your dog like the president? And maybe once per quiz, Face would ask you a question about the game. With one exception, face expression changes seem to have no effect on the game, except for indicating that the game creator thought of your answer. His reaction rarely made any sense, and at first I thought they were randomly generated. The questions never follow a pattern. Face never stayed on the same subject more than 2 questions. Early on, there were questions that made me think Face was building up to something, only to then ask some stupid garbage. Here are all the expression of Face that I saw when playing. I'll separate them into 2 categories, the expressions I understood and the expressions I didn't. First are the expressions I understood. 1 is neutral, 2 is angry, 3 is sad, 4 is happy, 5 is sick, 6 is maniacal, 7 surprised, 8 love, 9 is annoyed, 10 confused, 11 guilty hurt, and here are the others. 2 of these only appeared once, number 1 and 12, and I suspected that might have been an in-joke from the creator's perspective. The retrospective question were, do you like ice cream, and are you a tough guy? As for the question in the first quiz, luckily I had a notepad and a pen handy. I have problems remembering things, so I often carry one around to jot things down, and sometimes I doodle in it when I'm bored. So the first quiz started, and I thought I'd record what happened. I'm glad I did. Here are the first series of questions, my answers, and face reaction.
Quiz number 1. Number 1, do you like the game? Answer yes, reaction happy. Number 2, are you afraid? Answer yes, reaction surprised. Number 3, are you over 18? Answer yes, reaction weird face. Number 5. Number 4, do the birds have teeth? Answer no, reaction love. Number 5, is the peanut butter good? Answer no, reaction sick. Number 6, do the moon rotate? Answer yes, reaction weird face number 11. Number 7, do you have a job? Answer yes, reaction confused. Number 8, do you like hurting people? Answer no, reaction annoyed. Number 9, is the sun hot? Answer yes, reaction sad. Number 10, do you like dogs? Answer yes, reaction happy. Is the president good? Answer yes, reaction weird face number 3. Number 12, does your dog like the president? Answer no, reaction angry.
Now that I've explained all that, it's time for the gameplay. After the quiz level, I had tried the new green temple icon. Wow, maybe this is why the game was so weird. One of the designs was clearly dug out of his mind. Jokes aside, I was quite impressed by the graphics of this level, as disorienting as they were, but I hate those creepy blank staring statue faces. The music had a hypnotic Indian techno vibe to it. There were 2 new enemies in this level, a flying ghost type with a trunk, and a bat with horse skulls for a face. They appear at random, but I was lucky to get a screen cap of both of them. Then I proceeded to a blue mountain level. Expecting another nice calm stroll, I took my time walking through and am completely taken by surprise when this happened. Not Magra came speeding towards me and took quite a bit of health with his tentacle screws. It only took me 2 minutes to kill him without having to worry about a time limit, but the boss monster never showed up in the scrolling levels in normal games. I was worried as if to what other rules the game would break. After another blue mountain stage, it was time to fight Not Varan, whose replacement was one of the most bizarre things in the game. This strange creature attacks you by kicking and also opening up his chest and firing heat-seeking missiles. I still don't get it. The missiles were sometimes a pain to deal with, but I found out you could tell with them out of the way. Not Varan was probably the easiest monster of the replacements. The same could not be said for Not Hedorah. Apparently the source of the horse bat, Not Hedorah, was the most aggressively difficult monster to fight yet, mostly because of the special ability. He could shriek and summon a small swarm of those horse bat things. I know there's only 2 in the screen cap, but every time he did this, about 10 more would arrive. The AI took advantage of this distraction and attacked me twice as fast. The horse bat were flying around. Once that annoyance was over with, I went through a green temple level to kill some enemies to restore my health. Interestingly, none of the horse bats showed up after Not Hedorah was killed, and that was when I got an idea. If killing all the monsters make the red face show up, what would happen if I avoid fighting Orga and go straight to the base? So I gave it a try. The game told me there was no monster there. When I tried to start the base level, and immediately afterwards, the game took control of my Godzilla piece and moved it in front of Orga. My little trick didn't work, so I tried to prepare myself for another chase, but first I had to beat Orga. The fight with Orga confirmed another thing. Whoever created this hack was clearly a Godzilla fan. Not only because they pick up a monster like Orga, but because they actually implemented something that happened in Godzilla 2000. It was really neat. Orga's primary attack were a punch and a heat beam from his shoulders cavities, but once you had got him down to half health, he did something new. He would expand his jaw and try to swallow Godzilla, in the process stealing your health and energy. But in doing so, he gave himself a new weakness. Firing a heat beam into his mouth would take devastating 4 bars off his life meter. With that weakness revealed, I soon beat Orga, and despite how much I hoped otherwise, the red face appeared on the map where the base was, and the music stopped. I readied myself as best as I could. I started the level, and seeing that it was basically the same as the first, I didn't waste a millisecond before I started hauling my ass. So I encountered obstacles in the form of the ground tile, suspended in the air. Most of them you could jump over or destroy. Others you had to crouch under. About 40 seconds into, I heard the horrible bellowing roar and saw the spider beast following close behind me. Stacks of obstacles barely slowed it down. It would back up and then charge its way through them, smashing them into bits. And when the smaller obstacles got in the way, it would expand its jaw and swallow them whole. I was afraid. With fast thinking and faster button pressing, I escaped yet again. I felt really excited, so I laughed and said, "Not this time, asshole!" I decided to take a screen cap to celebrate. But when I did, when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, the monster did something that made my blood run cold. It looked at me. That wave of mortal terror overtook me again, and I sure as hell wasn't laughing anymore. I took another screen cap of the next level title, right before I rushed into the bathroom to splash some water on my face and take a piss that I nearly failed to contain when that fucking thing looked at me.
Chapter 4, Dementia.
When I got back to the game, I was very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. It had to be random occurrence. But why did it happen precisely at the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game makes any sense. The new Godzilla monster, the weird replacement monsters, and out-of-place imagery like green temples, quiz levels, and the red monster chases, it didn't seem to add up of any kind of meaningful way. If it was a prank, it wasn't funny in any way I could understand, and they clearly put too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel with the new Godzilla monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it was some kind of art experiment, some group project, maybe a bunch of really talented and crazy people, and they lost the cartridge somehow. Or maybe they intended for some random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I could tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal with this game was. To play it through to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there would be something in the credits and explaining by the creator as to what they made this for. Or it could be something more cryptic and strange, maybe even something horrifying. Before I got a good look at Dementia board, I considered replaying Trance to see if the red monster would look at me again, but I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was also somewhat worried about backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The Dementia board music sounded a lot like Saturn's music, except it was slowed down and played with a piano sounding instrument like most of these new map themes. It had a dangerous, suspenseful feeling. While listening to the music, I look at the Dementia board. There were 4 boss monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. I was surprised that there were 2 new Toho monsters this time, but the best surprise was still to come. I started on the quiz level. Here's another list of results in the same format as the last one.
Quiz 2. Number 1, can you swim? Answer yes, reaction happy. Number 2, do you like fish? Answer yes, reaction sick. Number 3, can penguins fly? Answer no, reaction sad. Can it spin in all directions?
There was no clarification of what face meant by it, so I just guessed.
Answer no. Reaction surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 8. Number 6. Does it taste good when you bite a woman?
I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help.
Answer no. Reaction annoyed. Is it night where you're at? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 6. Do you like cats? Answer yes. Reaction confused. Is water wet? Answer yes. Reaction angry. Have you ever broken a bone? Answer yes. Reaction happy. Do you like your job? Answer yes. Reaction hurt. Would you like a new monster? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 11.
I wasn't entirely sure what at the time what face meant by new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board and I had a new playable monster in the form of Ungerus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Ungerus, since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus, I never liked Mothra as much anyways. I moved my new Ungerus piece over to the level right to the next to it, eager to test out my new monster. Before I got into the level description, I'll talk about Ungerus a bit. Using up and down button, you could choose whether Ungerus stood up in bipedal stance or crawled around on all fours. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights, and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting, the ability to curl up into a spike ball of death and roll around, and you can still take damage, but it would be lessened. It was a good way of clearing out stage enemies, but unfortunately doing this also drained your power bar. But the spike ball wasn't his only special ability. When you press start, he would fire a beam of energy from his mouth. It resembles Titasaurus' sonar attack, but if this were a hack, it would have been inspired by the roar attack from the Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when you are playing as Ungerus, the level meter gets glitched up by judging by the life and power bar. It says he's on level 10. Now on to the level. As you might have guessed, from the level icon, these levels are green palette swaps of the ground and background tiles from the Blue Mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which was a transparency effect. Was that even possible for NES games? I know Super Nintendo can do it, but I had never seen a transparency effect in a game on a NES. The Green Mountain music was played, and with the same instrument as the Blue Mountain, but the melody was totally different. It was a very simple song with a lot of abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through with the usual strolling through the level, and again where there was no monsters or anything, but pretty soon I had reached a cliff above a water. There was nowhere to go but into the water, so I went down. The water transparency made things a bit harder to see, but it was tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered two new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottom feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was a sane enemy design that would appear in a real game, and there were a few enemies like this. They didn't take much hits to kill, but they were quite annoying, and could considerably trim down your life if they got close enough. They also tend to travel back in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easy to deal with. They swim along the bottom of the screen towards you, and they're easy to crush with a roll attack or jump over. In the screen cap, you can see me about to run over them, and there's a pack of piranhas behind them. After I beat that level, I moved Godzilla onto a blue castle icon. I started the level, and I got a title screen with the text, Unforgiving Cold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks, with rows of identical white statue faces on the wall. The statue face had permanent look of horror on their face. There was also a flickering gray static, which didn't really obscure my vision, but it added to the very unsettling mood of the levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalizing that sounded familiar to me. Whenever I played through one of these levels, I got this sudden horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the farther I progressed through the level, the closer I was getting to something unspeakably evil. There weren't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took 7 minutes to complete. I didn't want to admit it myself at the time, but I realized something playing the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I don't mean in the sense that you are getting irritated playing a crappy game or get unnerved by something scary in the game. What I mean is that certain events in the game can instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane. I don't blame you for not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this either, but I didn't play the game myself, but there is something very, very wrong with the game. And I still don't know how to explain it. So then it was time to fight Baragon, replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster in the game, his replacement was the largest. It was so tall, in fact, the ground was noticeably lowered, and Baragon's head was barely visible to the collision with the bar at the top of the screen. And he was just as frightening, bizarre, as he was huge. You may be wondering how he's attacking without arms. Well, he has the most powerful kicks in the game, but his other fighting techniques is much stranger. First, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down at you, which causes you to freeze, and then he walks back to the right of the corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdominal. That might be amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't for me. I was playing the game. This attack is the most as annoying as Gigan saw, and not Baragon could have been unbeatable if he consistently used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up and start damaging the gun, which does extra damage to him. This helped me destroy him, and then it was time to play the third level type. I decided that I was going to use Ungerus to fight Manda and Gigan, and then fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. It was only fitting. Before getting into the battle, I described the third level type, the Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you would guess from the name, an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminds me of a bit of a Northern Hemisphere from Donkey Kong Country in 8-bit form. A very dangerous sounding song, it made me think about being trapped in a tundra and freezing to death. There were only 2 new enemies in this stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way, and you have to use the heat beam to thaw them out of the ice. They look a bit like a small version of Nakazora, only without the eyes. When freed, they do a strange crawling movement and push you backwards. It doesn't cause any damage, but it's a bit annoying. After dealing with the Iceman, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing how the water splashes when you jump in. I don't know how they programmed that, but it's pretty impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changed focus when you're going underwater. Here you can see the other new enemy, a little thing I call spiky walkers. They walk towards you and explode randomly for instantly if you attack them. Sending spikes in every direction, the spikes don't do much damage, but they did get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, speaking of the pits, down into the water the game has a platformer element, Bottomless Pit. There weren't any of these in the original game, since it was strictly an action game, but the pits were a neat addition. After getting back on land, I encounter a very unexpected mini-boss, Maguma, the walrus kaiju. I know this game had some obscured monsters to begin with, but wow, not that I'm complaining, it's pretty cool cameo for an unappreciated kaiju. Maguma's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam, and he could charge into you. Not a very challenging, but certainly more entertaining than the Magato mini boss in the original game. One really interesting thing about Maguma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He turns tails and retreats. This was the first time I have ever heard or seen an enemy monster change directions, let alone retreat. I tried to chase after him, but he disappeared after. I got into the water, poor bastard. And that does it for the Arctic. I'll talk about the Manda fight next. I forgot to mention before, but the music that played during the new monster fights is reused from the themes actually in the game. So far, the themes have been Titosaurus Gazora's music, Biollante Hedorah's music, Orga Baragon's Magara's music, Manda Varan's music, Space Godzilla Mechagodzilla's music. As for the fight, Manda was a fairly crafty opponent. When it realized one tactic was ineffective, it would immediately change to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks, like spitting fire, biting, and most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercifully drain your life down like Gigan's cutter, but it was by far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note that I found pretty cool was that the Artagon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through the Arctic level for health power-ups, and then it was on to Gigan's replacement. When the fight started, I was very confused because there was nothing there. I thought this was going to be like the Titosaurus fight and Pathos, but this was about the time it would have been going back to the map. A piranha appeared on screen, but it wasn't there for long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech, and Gigan flew and ripped the poor fish into pieces. Well, that's one way to get player on their toes. That abrupt entrance scared the living shit out of me, and got my adrenaline rushing, which in retrospect was a good thing, because Gigan was one of the most fastest and most unrelenting opponent in the game. Gigan was tough, but my new skills with Ongerus helped to even the score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Gigan attacked consistent of some kind of blood laser and spewed out of his mouth. And a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of a buzzsaw attack, but thankfully there didn't seem to be one. The Howl attack was invulnerable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps of the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, there was just one monster left to take down, Space Godzilla. As mentioned earlier, I used Godzilla for this fight. Space Godzilla fighting techniques were rather frustrating, but admittedly, a very clever idea. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which would reach the ground and become crystal spires. The spires not only blocked you from reaching Space Godzilla, but it allowed him to consistently charge to full energy and blast you with a deadly full charge of Corona Beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered, but if you waited for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat Beam actually seemed to re-energize the spires, so you had to use physical attacks. When you finally got close enough to hit Space Godzilla, he was no pushover. When I punched him, he hit me back just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner of the screen so he can create more spires. By the time this was over, I only had about 5 life bars left. But it didn't matter because I didn't need to fight him anymore. I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of this game, as terrifying as these levels could sometimes be. I had to beat them to get through. I decided that no matter what happens, no matter what the game showed me, I was going to get to the end. And I also made sure not to say a damn word while playing a chase level from here on. For this chase, I tried out Ungerus, since his roll attack allowed me to move much faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started off like the first two, except there was a river of blood below the ground. I was beginning to get a hang of it, and the extra speed from the roll helped me get on the edge of the red monster, especially since I didn't have to worry about power limit and could keep rolling endlessly. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably reached to a stop, so I rolled off into the blood. To my surprise, the hell beast didn't follow. It just stopped at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess it can't swim, I thought to myself. So I went under blood and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, and I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, could it? Surely something else had to show up, and sure enough, I heard it. The bellowing roar, sounding slightly different. And the monster was following after me in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. After it appeared, the chase started to get into a difficult I had expected. Being submerged slowed me down, putting me and the beast about the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits, in which mines floated up from. I assumed that if you hit one, it would damage you and knock you back, considering how fast the monster swims. Hitting the mines would insist death, so I went through great effort to avoid them. But that wasn't all I had to be worried about. Half through the chase, the Hell Beast revealed yet another surprise, a tentacle form of intestines, and tipped with claws, a set of jaws burst from its mouth, trying to pull me in and devour me. I could only barely avoid the tentacles and the mines, and I could tell the beast was getting desperate because the chase was nearly over. And about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as an exit. I leaped with all the might I could muster without breaking my controller. The beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp this time. I fell back onto my bed, took a deep breath, satisfied with yet another successful escape. Now I was headed with the fifth world, Entropy.
Chapter 5, Entropy.
In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto, ironically. Despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest of most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it, distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved, not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of these levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batara, and Mechagodzilla. As usual, the first thing I do was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional, because after the first 2 questions, at the start of the quiz, started to take a darker tone.
Quiz 3. Number 1. Do you like ice cream? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 1. Number 2. Do you like clowns? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 10. Number 3. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 2. Number 4. Do you have any regrets? Answer yes. Reaction hurt. Number 5. Do some people deserve to die? Answer no. Reaction weird face number 3. Number 6. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 5. Number 7. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer yes. Reaction weird face number 9. Number 8. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer no. Reaction weird face number 7. Number 9. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer no. Reaction angry. Number 10. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer no. Reaction weird face number 4. Number 11. Does life have any real meaning? Answer no. Reaction love. Number 12. Do you like Mothra? Answer no. Reaction maniacal.
I knew the last one was going to be a gameplay related question, and I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing Mothra in this game, and there was a good reason for that. Every time Mothra gets hit, she slams back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles and some levels. So I answered no, and the face actually replied back to me, not only with a maniacal expression, but with this text. I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. FaZe had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed, but there wasn't anything I could do. I am willing to even bet if I had said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyways. Face giveth, and the face taketh away. I took a deep breath, and I got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for a reason I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me, even more than the previous one. Perhaps it was the pitch black background I have always seen and afraid of being in the forest at night. Something about all those trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery. Being in control of the king of monsters, I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra, not feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug, traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had a new instrument, sounding like a woodwinds, followed by slow rhythmic drums and chiming bells. Gave this feeling that I was intruding into something dangerous I really shouldn't be at. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long legged deers like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around when I approached them, and they ran away. I thought about shooting one of the eye beams to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encounter a group of deer like animals, and also two new creatures, a sloth like creature with a beak climbing on the tree, and a hairy raptor escaped beast that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal to watching these creatures interact. I don't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptor did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying on top of the screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play the level with the hourglass or the TV screen I picked later. What I got was not at all what I expected. When I pressed the button to start the level on the screen, like I normally would, the screen with the animation popped up. There was also a music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be played in the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it was just so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could just go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had know what to expect of the rest of these icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was only certainly of an orthodox looking level, all brown with the measuring instrument floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. And very early in the level, I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. And not just that, it seemed to be the whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were three of these. One, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. Two, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level with the enemies of the future. Three, an hourglass that set time to the normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first and started the game starting to slow down. And I saw the enemies of the past, which were five different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all of these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment, and I encountered the green hourglass, and then I fought the original game enemies again. It was the same five types of I didn't take any screenshots. But in the last segment, I encountered the red hourglass and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of the creatures that would actually exist thousands of years into Earth's future, I had no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie. And it made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called the Trudeau Man. Another looked like something like an organic spaceship. There was only one of the fifth type of future creatures, and when it appeared, all the other ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprites didn't actually move, and its a single attack was firing lightning bolts from the face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored my health and energy I had lost during the fight. Which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After the previous stage I called Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of the ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like had sniffed some toxic fumes myself, and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing this level. The enemies of all seem to be mutated in some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see the green mummies and bird skulls that jumped out of the waste to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone. And when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of the barrel like an anteater-like tongue. I was moving only to try to make it stop. But then this flock of skull birds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the background into a toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quickly from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward, all these levels entropy. This was probably the most normal, in that there was little deviance from the move forward smash thing formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like tentacle blobs and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept flying near the top of the screen. I had to deal with occasional flock of birds now and then, though. At the end of the level was a large, blushy green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss, some kind of monster with a long neck and whale-like skull. It attacked with a mouth projectile, and by charging into you, it also could go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken it 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon, and hadn't seen yet, which was a white trees, as I guessed the level was a winter theme recolored of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it, a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous covered in snow. I traveled through the first segment, enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when suddenly I realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started this level. Where are all the animals at? Soon after I left the screen and the next segment start, in the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious. But then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game that was likely another one of those. But then I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second loop music from Unforgiving Cold. Starting up, I could feel my heart sink as I came across the horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish bluish tone of their skin, they have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some of them were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in the living state, and sure enough I did. It was a creature much like the beak sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors who must have sensed that something else was alive came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beak gorilla did not stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately ripped and lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from the temperatured relatives. When these other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight and was running back and forth and crawling at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I even saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain, with a very bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned. And immediately, I started to feel dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's absolutely truth. The game made this level for one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake, and then the moon moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves cracked and disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. The screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus I was introduced to a monster I called the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight, and it was the most difficult fight yet. Stronger than any of the previous bosses, this creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra it would seem nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gigan's Saw, because if it had, I would have never won this fight. I barely had 3 bars of health when I finally killed this abomination. But what happens afterwards is hardly what I could call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I had to get off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but this game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just start telling you the important parts because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into these episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly, without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I wouldn't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in the field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything at me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but suddenly sprung up and ran right into the traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck, and she was killed that night. I looked right at her in her eyes, and then the wheels went over her neck. The sight has always haunted me. I know that the game knows about this because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do, not to burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go so far, or that it would even be capable of doing what it just did. I could feel my brain going haywire as I asked myself, did this game just read my mind? That didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. This game was alive. And not only that, it could also establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my mind, or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelations, I really wanted to see this through to the end, even more than I did before I beat Dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried to restart the game, it might just go back to being normal again. How many times people ever go to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take a screenshot of the whole thing? Fucked up as it is, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn the TV off in case I felt I was in actual danger. If that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall, or just run out of the room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever the power the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV and whatever its mental connection can do. The later was what worried me. I still don't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few minutes to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of the TVs, there was a TV screen icon right below the white forest I had just left. And because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try to see what happened. Although I expected the same animation, I actually got a totally different one. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board music. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fishman and all. I can't help but wonder what the point of this things were. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the most coolest thing, so I went to that and I started up the level gold labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled. Not sure how or why, but I was glad not to be heading into the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that my Mothra sprite had shrunk to half its original size. The music had slowed, ominous drum beats, with the female vocals kicking in about a minute into the white hunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seemed necessary just to get around this place. Another thing that caught my attention was that when you go left, the monster actually turns and face the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but the original game you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move to the left, your monster ended up flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size, because every time I thought I had reached an end to it, or thought I was going to end up back to where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava barricades, and new enemies and statue face. And I found one statue face at the dead end, with a wide open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this one the whole time. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still had the same expression. I can't help but feel like something really staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyways, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly that the only one of its kind in the level, lacking any kind of hover ability. Like the other creatures, I just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't long after I found that if a flying machine swooped down and grabbed it, and then flew off with it, the machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over the cauldron and then dropped the creature into it. The creature came and emerged from a hole in the cauldron's side, new adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it, because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realized that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route through Entropy easier. There were still two new icons to explore, the Indigo Cliff and a black version of the Labyrinth. Since there were only three Black Labyrinth icons, which were surrounded by bosses, I played the Indigo Cliff first. It was a lot like the Blue Green Mountains. The level graphics had the same shredded look to it. There's also a recolor of the clouds and moons from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you could call it that, was merely a deep, rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big head emerge from a small cave in the ground. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by the large birds, which I'm fairly certain are sprite versions of the giant Gondor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I defeated some of the condors in the battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seemed to be so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps the creatures in this level are also alive, and some have had very unhappy lives, if this behavior is in any indications. But what provoked them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching up to a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me, so acting on impulse, I fired beams at both the monster and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any range attacks, it was relentless, but it was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was going to go through Barada first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mechagodzilla, and lastly, going through the chase with the Hellbeast. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, time to beat up Batara. As I expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varan's battle theme. Whenever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, the other forms always show up. For a game that's otherwise unacceptable, it's rather starting in inconsistently and accuracy with these new kaiju bosses. The fight started off simple. Larva Batara fought in a similar fashion Amagama did, charging back and forth, occasionally firing off lightning from its horns. During the fight, I noticed Mothra's combat capabilities have been altered in my favor. The I-beams did 2 times as much damage as they originally did. Now they are strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improvised. It also did the nice thing it would actually hit an enemy when you use it. The original game, even though Mothra couldn't fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You could get knocked back the same way as you just ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying. But not anymore. I could change direction and fly around, which was a big help because fighting Imago Batara is much like fighting a clone Mothra. Although Batara is distinctly faster and stronger, no longer impeded by its slow-moving larva form, Imago Batara was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the horn lightning, it now had a new, more powerful I-beam. Batara could change directions just like I could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batara, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like, but first I went through the Indigo Cliff levels and shot through a lot of creatures for health and power-ups. So about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one and so far only film appearance. He was a lot like Magara, but faster, and with more weapons. He start out charging off with his drill. I liked to fly back and forth around him, which seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back and turn around and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain, because they bounced when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his light beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under and then shoot him with eye beams. Overall, I described him as a strong, persistent, but dumb. I was now nearing the end of Entropy. I had just taken down Megalon, and I started up the last TV screen to see what I get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was a password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent in comparison to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't before. Most likely it was just the tension from all had happened in this game getting to me. But who knows? The last level type on Entropy is what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambience, similar to the Unforgiving Cold, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about 12 minutes, and I noticed there wasn't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from a gold labyrinth which was overrun with creatures to this level that had nothing at all, but then might be a good thing. Maybe there wouldn't be any obstacles and I could get through this level with ease. And immediately I snapped out of my daze. From a few seconds earlier, everything had been dark, so that the only thing I could see was Mothra's sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going, and I ended up frantically running into walls, and I heard a noise that sound of a crowd running through the hallways. Oh, and along with the running came across a roar, a loud roaring sound, which I would describe as something like a big rabid dog the size of an elephant screaming with fury. And I could tell whatever was making this noise, there were lots of them. I knew there was something out there, but it wasn't until I did some screen capping editing that I got to see what was my pursuer look like. But at the time, I couldn't see where they were or where I was going. I was literally running blind at this mob of beasts. Eventually, I caught up with me. All I can think was no. As I saw my life bar rapidly declining, the monster had taken me down by half of my total health. When I was saved, the light came back on, and the attacker had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the light goes out and a pack of monsters will maul you to death. I was in a panic mode right now, moving as fast as I could, go while trying to every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the light went out totally 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead meat if it had not been for one of the wide-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to be all avoiding me until the light came back. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. But before exiting, there was a row of halls leading straight down, with no way out. Once entered, you either got to the exit before the monster reached you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss, Mechagodzilla. I started the battle and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back to 100% again, it seemed to do that randomly. But instead of replacement of the boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Mechagodzilla started off like fighting a clone Godzilla. But his disguise burned away, only 3 life bars. And usually, a transformation only occurs halfway through the point. At this point, it was like fighting Mechagodzilla in the normal game. Felt kinda nice to fight one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly like normal, he also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevent me from doing any old tricks of backing him into a corner and hitting him with an eye beam in a spot where he can't really hit me. But that was always a cheap trick anyways. But after getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch, in much the same way as Godzilla had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitch began to form a new shape. And thus the game had created not Mechagodzilla, and I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreating this thing. The human face on this one gives it a clear, very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters, and had the most firepower. Pictured here it is the mouth beam, which caught me in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was also slower than the original counterpart, and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by consistently staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison powder as I flew over it. One last thing to do, the Hell Beast chase. Oh boy, might as well just get going over with it, I thought. The Entropy in chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be. A labyrinth level, all the other chases, although the difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took a simplicity out of it. There was no telling how big the labyrinth would be, or where the exit was. And now, not only did I have to consistently backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. And for those 30 seconds, it didn't show up, but I knew it would. And I started picking up the pace. I heard a loud flapping noise. And there it was, in a flying form. It flew with a bat-like wing, and was as fast and relentless as ever. 4 reasons already started this with probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. And such as I had to keep my focus on the game and not taking screen caps, however, I did take one of the red monster doing something I found very interesting. I managed to lose it by going through a different path than I apparently expected, and it was blocked by attacking me by one of the organic walls from the red labyrinth, or so I thought. It tried clawing through the wall for seconds before opening up its mouth and tearing the wall apart with its intestine jaws. But for those brief milliseconds, that monster was held back might have been the key to me finding the exit. A path to the exit was long and complex, but from what I remembered, I went up and back towards the left. I'm still not sure why I choose the particular way, just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I hoped that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. Next was the penultimate world called EXTUS.
Chapter 6, EXTUS.
In the brief instant before the transition between Entropy and EXTUS, I was hoping that I would get Godzilla and Ungerus back. As the board appeared, I saw that my wish had half granted. I had got Godzilla back, but no Ungerus. I would have preferred both, but despite Ungerus' neat abilities, I would have chosen Godzilla if I had to pick between the two. EXTUS had 2 different colored temples, white and pink, a pyramid, and what looked like some modern building, and 2 other icons I couldn't figure out at the time. The new bosses were Kumanga, Gogosaurus, and not Ghidorah, whom I was dreading to see, let alone fight. With Godzilla back, I was excited again and eager to explore, yet still cautious. I went to the quiz level first. Just as before, this time, face questions were more random than ever.
Quiz 4. Number 1, do elephant breathe? Answer yes, reaction weird face. Number 2, have you ever been molested by a family member? Answer no, reaction weird face. Number 6. Number 3, have you ever been raped by anyone? Answer no, reaction weird face. Number 8. Number 4, is green your favorite color? Answer no, reaction weird face. Number 10. Number 5, is the computer the pinnacle of modern technology? Answer yes, reaction weird face. Number 4. Number 6, are you a tough guy? Answer yes, reaction weird face. Number 12. Number 7, can you fly? Answer no, reaction weird face. Number 9. Number 8, can you stand on your head? Answer yes, reaction weird face. Number 7. Number 9, do you hate raccoons? Answer no, reaction confused. Number 10, do you feel blame? Answer no, reaction weird face. Number 11. Number 11, do you like a new monster? Answer yes, reaction surprised. Number 12, will you miss me? Answer yes, reaction sad.
I was happy that I was getting a new monster, but that last question bothered me. Will you miss me? Is Face referring when I finished the game? I thought. Since the revelation of this game's truly unworldly nature, I wasn't sure what to think of Face, or anything else in the game. But something about that last statement gave me a genuine feeling of sadness from Face. As I was thinking about this, the game had gone back to the board. I had a new monster, but I had no idea who it was supposed to be. The sprite had a slight resemblance to Rodan, but the head was totally off. I moved this mysterious newcomer to a white temple icon and started the level. When I started the level, the screen prepared with the text, "Find the gem," presumably the instructions for beating the level. After I got my first look at the new playable monster, a hairy dark blue creature with bat wings and a skull-like face named Solomon. And I also found that my path was blocked by a beam of light and a small pillar with a plate on it. I figured that this beam of light was blocking the exit, so I had to find the gem and drop it on the plate to deactivate the beam. How exactly I was going to do that, I don't know. There wasn't anything in the original game requiring you to find them items to beat the level. I had to find out when I obtained the gem. The only direction I had to go was left, so I proceeded. Solomon was an interesting monster, to say the least. He was capable of both flight and heat beam, both which provide to be very useful. He also could kick and slash with his wings, but he couldn't duck. The White Temple music was a vocalizing choir or a video game approximation of such. It's hard to describe it, but it had a very holy sound to it. It wasn't long before I started running into a wave of strange new enemies. They did little to stop me. I ran past them while slashing and didn't take any damage. There was a pause between each wave of enemies. After you had killed about 10, there wouldn't be any for about a minute. Then the next wave would appear, after 5 minutes. I've noticed holes in the floor and ceiling. The guillotine mouth creature were rapidly flying up and down these crevices, so I had to time my jumps carefully because I didn't know if it'd get another shot at this. Luckily, I managed to get through without a scratch. I'm just lucky, I guess. After that, I had found myself at the end of the hallway, facing some kind of mini-boss monster. It moved fast and had some kind of projectile that it shot in all 4 directions. But I killed it quite easily with using Solomon's heat beam. When the battle was over, I had the gem, which was inside the creature's head. I have found that I could pick up and hold the gem by walking over to it and hold down B. I made the long trek back to the start, depositing the gem on the plate, which deactivated the beam. I left the stage and was shown what was probably the strangest quirk relating to the Solomon monster. Still the Beast, 1973. Every time you complete the stage or defeat a boss with Solomon, the screen appeared. I have no still idea what it was. Still the Beast, 1973. Means neither the date nor the phrase has any meaning or significance to me that I can think of, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about. The next level I played was one that I called Bronze Pyramid. I used Godzilla and found that he had been leveled up to 12 since I last played him at Dementia. The Bronze Pyramid were fairly normal as far as these levels go, but the visuals were quite interesting, almost unusually colorful and lively. The music had a fitting Egyptian style to it. It's slow and mysterious sounding. I strolled through the level fighting off various enemies. None were too difficult, although ants could be a pain if you ran too many at once. My favorite enemy was a giant reptile I encountered halfway through. At the end of the level, I came to a giant pyramid and I engaged yet another mini-boss fight. Although this was a bit different because I had to fight 2 of these monsters at the same time, individually, I could have dealt with them easily, but fighting both of them at once was challenging. But I sped things up by tricking one of the 2 twin beasts into barbecuing his brother by jumping when he used the flame breath. After defeating the twin monsters, I noticed something strange. After returning to the board, I was now able to move my monster piece anywhere on the board, without limits. Normally, Godzilla could only move 3 spaces each turn, and Mothra could only move 5. I wanted to try out Solomon some more, so I moved the piece over to the brown pillar, looking icon with colored dots, and started the level. When I got to the level, I then realized that what the level icon represented. Totem poles. I was greeted by 2 of them right at the beginning. The music had a Native American sound to it. It seemed to be using the same instruments as the Entropy forest. It was noticeably different, but just as foreboding. I walked around 3 minutes with nothing else in sight besides the totem poles. I didn't realize until then, but I was expecting another level with nothing alive in it. But after all, the activity of Entropy. Walking by all those multicolored faces, the unnerving level left me feeling like I was being watched. Only about 10 minutes after I started EXTUS, I was already halfway through. After getting back from the totem pole level, I tried out one of the TV screens to see how strange they were this time. Even more strange than before, apparently the music for this one was the Uranus theme. I switched back to Godzilla to play another level, and this level was quite a surprise. It was a normal city level. The colors were gloomy, but even still, this was quite a shock. This was the kind of level I would expect to see in a Godzilla game, and I was kind of mad that I didn't get to play it earlier. The music was the Earth theme. I found that it was strange that a level fitting a Godzilla game would show up this late, but there's no point in crying over spilt milk, I suppose. I moved Solomon over to a grayish green icon, which turned out to be a giant high-tech laboratory of some sort. Lots of mechanical drones in this level, but Solomon cleared them just like the White Temple enemies. The music was gritty, industrial beat. There was also a strange flying cyborg enemy, which was annoying because it could fly away when you jumped to attack it. Also of interest were these large stasis tanks, holding some kind of monster inside. As you would guess, sometimes the monster awakened and shattered through the glass. I tried to get past the stasis tanks as fast as I possibly could, because the monster inside proved to be a lot more vicious bastard upon release. At the end of the level of the elevator, which I used to go down to the bottom of the level where the exit was, along the way, I was shot by a security drone. I couldn't have left the elevator, so my only defense was the heat beam. The last level type was a simple thing that I called the Heart Temple, for obvious reasons. Nothing but a big hallway filled with floating enemies shaped like human hearts. They're incapable of causing you damage, so what you do is run through the level, smashing as many you can to get all the power-ups. One run through these levels would get your life meter back to full, and I would greatly appreciate these levels later. The Heart Temple music reminded me of the circus tune. It had an overly cheerful sound to it, which gave the level a really weird feeling. Having seen all the level types, I choose to fight Gigasaurus using Solomon. The music for this fight was Gigasaurus' theme. It was during the fight I realized that Solomon is overpowered. A single well-aimed slash can take down as many as 4 of the enemy's life bars. Due to this, the fight was over very quickly. Gigasaurus had no projectile attack or anything else that could match Solomon's deadly claws. But I kept the fight going just long enough to see Gigasaurus would use his iconic kangaroo kick, and I was greatly pleased when he did. Even though I knew Solomon was my fighting ace, I used Godzilla to battle Kumanga for the variety. I briefly considered using Mothra, but of course Godzilla won out. Kumanga was also a simple opponent, no heat beams or anything. He attacked by jumping on you, stabbing you with his mandibles, and also used his signature webbing steam to paralyze you. Once you got webbed, Kumanga will sometimes take the opportunity to attack you, but it's mostly a way to buy some time. Like Godzilla backing you in the corner until time runs out. His music was Hedorah's theme. With Gigasaurus and Kumanga defeated, I was at the end of EXTUS before I fought Not Ghidorah. There was something I had to do. I wasn't expecting much from it, but for documentation's sake, I took a look at another TV screen. This what it was. I don't think there ever was much reason behind the TV screens if I were to guess. I'd say it's some random, uncontrollable manifestation of the cartridge's abilities. Or maybe all this makes perfect sense to the game. Who knows? Anyways, Mr. Fawcett's theme was the Saturn music. It was time for the opponent I had been dreading, Not Ghidorah. Although I had gained courageous with Solomon's combat advantages, I still was nervous. And when I started to fight, I immediately was confused. My opponent, Not Ghidorah, I defeat the imposter with a few strikes. And then Not Magra appeared, And then it made sense. In order to get to Nagadora, I had to battle all the previous replacements first. And battle them I did. I tore my way through until I finally made it to Nagadora, who was a Dorat. Once I stopped laughing, I destroyed him with only 2 slashes. The music stopped, and I thought I was going to go back to the board, but the battle wasn't over yet. The real fight was against a Chimera, a monstrous hybrid of replacement beast that was by far the most difficult boss yet. Every attack of his would cut you down whole life bars per use. While attacking against him were greatly weakened, Solomon's Slash, for example, was now lucky to take away 1/2 of a bar life. During this battle, I gained a great appreciation for 2 things, the boss fight time limit and the Heart Temple. Had it not been for those things, I might have never beaten this boss. To take down this behemoth, I came up with a strategy. I would switch between Godzilla and Solomon, and one began to get dangerously low on health. I would take him through the Heart Temple while fighting Chimera with the other. I should count my blessings that Chimera couldn't regain lost health. A very interesting thing about the Chimera was that the colored section of his body corresponded with different parts of his body, so each body part effectively had its own life meter. The head was invincible so as long as the other parts were present, and would always be the last part of the body to be destroyed. In addition to being difficult, it was also the longest fight so far. I tried to remember how many times I got back out to the fight by the timer, but I lost count around 13. Eventually, I had destroyed all components but the head, which now flew around on its own at a credible speed. Chimera fought well, but I was extremely determined, and once he was reduced to a head, he no longer had power to defeat Solomon, and I heat-beamed into him oblivion. And then Chimera was no more. I was exhausted. After that drawn-out fight, and worried that might affect my performance in the end world chase level, the headquarter icon was replaced by not by a hellbeast face, but instead it was a crucifix. I was completely stunned. I wasn't excited about seeing the hellbeast icon again, but if there was only one good thing about those levels, it's that they were predictable. I had a basic idea of what to expect, but now, here I was at the end of the icon was completely different. What did it mean? And why a crucifix? It made me very uneasy. I attempted to start the level with Solomon, but couldn't at all. I got the notice that simply stated, Solomon can't enter here. It didn't say why, but I think maybe it's to do with Solomon's demonic appearance. Since Solomon was out of the question, I went with Godzilla instead. Once I saw the level, the crucifix had made sense. The level was a graveyard. I was still on edge, thinking this was some kind of trick that the last level had always involved running with a demonic beast, and I wasn't going to be fooled into thinking this would be any different. So I started out running, but after a minute without interruption, I slowed down. It was during this time the music caught my attention. I knew it sounded familiar when I first heard it, but it took me a while to realize what it was. It was an 8-bit rendition of Prayer for Peace from the Godzilla film, a very sad, powerful song, even in this form. At 2 minutes into this level, I encountered something that I wasn't sure how to react to. My first instinct was to run, but this blue statue escaped. Being simply floated in place, I felt compelled to just stare at it for a time. Since this was a grave, and it was floating over a chapel, I guess this was some kind of angel watching over the deceased. It gave me a strange but warm feeling. I wouldn't say happy, but it felt like at peace, somehow. I had never seen this being before, yet it seemed very familiar to me. Just as I was going to leave, the hell beast appeared, and its presence warped the music into a terrifying, discolored screeching, and transformed the level, desecrating the tombstones as a new ground appearance, comprised of blood and soaking blood. I could feel my heart now beating out of control. I had no chance of escape with the monster that close. It lunged for the kill, but the angel got in the way. The demonic roared and started clawing through the angel's legs, and tears of blood streamed from its eyes. I wanted to save the angel, but there was nothing I could do. I had honored its sacrifice and run, as fast as I could run, the hellish landscape as fast as I could. The beast soon caught up with me, with still swallowing the body of the angel, whose legs it had torn off. And the sight made my terror change into anger. I now found myself hating this horrible monster. There was no doubt in my mind that it was a pure evil and I wanted to die. When I got to the end, I remember how it responded to my insult in Trance. I spoke to it and said, "You're going to pay." This was its response. I had no idea how it would follow up on that threat, and nothing could have prepared me for the horrors of the final world. Zenith.
Chapter 7, Zenith.
And here we are, at the final world. I don't like to discuss this part, and it still bothers me very much, but it's something I have to do, so that I can put this behind me. People deserve to know. At this point, I was well aware of the game's unnatural nature, but Zenith was different than the other worlds. While the other were certainly strange and sometimes frightening, the world of Zenith was like a nightmare, and I didn't have to go any further than the board screen for an indication that something was wrong with Zenith. The first thing I've noticed was the blood-red texture of the board, and the music, which was an eerie, whistling tune. I noticed that I had Solomon and Ungarus back, and I felt better for a second. Then I strolled over to the right to see who my enemy would be this time. This time it was Destroya and Ghidorah, but judging from the icon, it was different Ghidorah than the original, standing on the ground instead of flying. The grotesquely detailed pinkish red icon also caught my eye. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to be, and I was afraid to find out. Going back to my side of the board, I decided there wasn't much choice to do my usual routine. I'm going to the quiz level. Before doing anything else, I was not ready for what happened. I jumped back when this appeared, accompanied by a terribly distorted version of the password theme. It looked as if Face had fallen victim to the terrible glitch. Is this what he meant by "will you miss me"? Did he know this would happen? My thoughts were stopped short as I noticed the screen was glitching and seemingly falling apart while I was inactive, and so I quickly rushed out. And when I got back to the board, I had somehow gained a new monster. I hadn't even asked if I wanted one. I tried to select it, and this happened.
No.
What the hell is going on? The game's behavior is scaring me. And I didn't even started the level yet. I couldn't understand why I was randomly given a new character, and then denied to use it. But for the time being, there was a little that could be done. and I viewed the last TV screen. No animation, no music. Dead. Every instinct I was telling me to stop playing, to just turn the game off, and something in the game itself might have been trying to warn me as to just how horrible this last world was. But then, every stretch of the way, I was compelled to give up. I couldn't do that now. Now the last world, besides after taunting me with the memories of Melissa, I felt the game owed me some answers. I noticed that the level was a red temple, so it would be familiar with the level graphics, if nothing else. And I went in with Godzilla, the monster I was most familiar with. Godzilla had been shrunk, the level score meter had vanished, and the blue temple statue face were back. The music was similar to the blue temple, also strange haunting vocalization. I tried to get my spirits up by thinking, well, if this level was like anything like the blue temple, then that might mean there are no enemies to deal with. How wrong I was. After a short walk, all the statue's eyes started glowing, and a pack of beasts from Shadow Labyrinth came charging at me. Since they were coming from the right screen, I had to fight my own way out. This battle greatly tested my reflexes, but thanks to my speed, I plowed through the beasts. They gave off health powers up after dying, which helped recover the damage that they have given me. However, as I continued through the hallway, the statue's eyes glowed again, summoning another wave. It seemed to be the same numbers of them, but I was less prepared this time and took more damage. I had gone through 4 of these waves until I reached the end of the hall, where I heat beamed the last of the monsters over the edge into the abyss. At first it seemed I had reached a dead end, but after the statue's eyes stopped glowing, a brick pathway slowly appeared before me. I followed the path, which kept me moving towards the right until I stopped at a wall, where I was going vertically up by jumping on ledges. Along the way, I encountered new creatures and some sort of strange shrine, and which had a statue of Hellbeast and some other creatures I don't recognize. As I went through, the path took a downward direction. I had to carefully aim my jumps to avoid the enemies, which were plentiful in this part of the stage. They didn't have many attacks, but they could easily shove you over the edge of the platform. At the end of the tunnel, there were a few small platforms floating above nothingness. I landed on one of them, the left of the screen, and then something came down from above. It looked like a blue angel from the graveyard, except now it was red and had a skull face. Any of the pleasant feeling I had from the blue angel was not present with this red one. And as it hovered over, the eye's sockets started glowing, just like the statues, summoning monsters to attack me. Surely this was not the same malevolent being I encountered before. This must be some kind of imposter. The battle was nerve-wracking, as I started off with nearly half of my health and had to deal with multiple opponents, as well as a threat of gravity to make things even worse. As the red angel took damage, some of the panels fell, until only 3 remained, but my luck had not run out yet. Just when I thought it was over, I struck the red angel one more time, and it turned out that one last hit was all it could take. Just as the red angel completely disintegrated, the game instantly went back to Zenith. I moved Mothra over to the nearest stage from the red temple, which seemed to be a garbled mess of letters spelling kill, and began playing. As suspected, all the level graphics were made out of jumbled letters, and Mothra was just like Godzilla, was shrunken down half the size. I began to suspect that all of Zenith's levels would be like this. The background music was terrible, like if someone put all the sounds in the NES and capable of making into a blender and then piecing them back together into a song. I had turned the volume down because of it. Playing as Mothra made avoiding the enemies easier, but they were nothing less determined to get at me. The first enemy I saw was a headless Gigans, and later on there were hybrid monsters pieced together from previous bosses, like the Biollante head being seen above. 5 minutes had gone by, as I didn't see anything new, and the level shifted into another segment. The music changed from a loud and annoying beep into something far more ambient and menacing. The level graphics also changed. Now looking of a blood-drenched junkyard. The way everything in this level was, red made it sickening to look at. The enemies multiplied in number, never ceasing to follow me after, and became harder and harder to avoid. And at the end of the level, the situation reached a climax as a swarm of monsters fused together in one enormous terrifying hybrid. Once I had gotten through the initial shock, I discovered the way to destroy this thing. Consistently shooting eye beams at the Hedoran cluster that formed its head. If you attacked anywhere else, it would regenerate the damage. Even with the knowledge, this was extremely difficult fight. I'd say it was hard as fighting the Moon Beast. If it was not harder, its most common attack was lunging forward with its arms, covered with Gigan saw and blades. If they touched, it would instantly drain health. When it was over, the remaining monsters collapsed into a heap. And the ground below them started to disintegrate and sink towards the bottom of the screen. When I came back to the board, I thought to myself, so far, the game has put the easiest level first. If that's the case, how bad will the rest of Zenith be? With 2 levels down and 3 to go, my monster and I had taken our foothold in the world of nightmares that was Zenith. Deciding that what action to take next was more tense and difficult than ever before. But ultimately, I had no way of knowing what the next level would be like, or how well my monster would be prepared for them. So my only option was to guess. I tried to interpret what the icons of the next levels ahead of me were. The last level before the boss battle was obviously representing some type of volcanic area, with lava and open flames. The middle icon I didn't get, except that it looked fleshy and vaguely like an organ of some kind, oddly oversized as well. The one I was nearest to, and about to enter the next, looked like a thorny vine covered in a puddle of blood. I guess this would be a level with blood rivers, like the chase level in Dementia. As such, I went with Ungerus, because due to his rolling move, he would have been the fastest speed while submerged. The level, which I called Blood Lake, looked like as I expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorn-covered vines, which were scattered along the side of the ground. The music was rather faint, but I could hear a distinct drum beat and a few other instruments, and a lot of echoes. And sometimes it sounded like something was hitting the drum underwater. I was disappointed to see that Ungerus was shrunken just as Godzilla and Mothra had been. Apparently all Zenith levels would be like this. I felt less secure with my giant monster no longer so giant. I walked along without any interruptions for only a minute until my path reached a dead end. There was a mass gap between the ground and I was walking on and the ground to the right of the screen. I would have swam across it and continued walking right, but due to the huge mass of brambles in the way, there was nowhere to go. 2 creatures with gliding membranes on their arms and lamprey-like mouths with perched on outstretched vines and screeching at me. much like a crow does to the invaders of its territory, another unnerving displays of possible sentence by the creatures of the game, if it's even accurate to refer to them as being of the game, that is. I descended into the blood, slowly sinking to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were hard to avoid. The black shark, in particular, was very aggressive and hard to deal with, but thankfully I only encountered one. As the scene became more and more crowded, I swam up to the surface to find that it was littered with floating corpses. Creepy, but at least they're not a threat, or so I thought. Until they all sprang to life and leaped on me. They were trying to pull me under, and they were draining my health as they did. They all attacked as a group, and when I got one off of me, another one would jump on me from behind. I had to curl up into a ball and roll for them to loosen their grip. And when they did, I quickly retreated. It wasn't long after before I had reached another land path. A note regarding the brambles: you can stand on them because it causes pain, and as if you can also destroy some of the vines, but only the thinner ones. I had to destroy multiple vines, as well as dealing with more enemies. I was interrupted by a scream, saying "Mother." The screen was only up for about 30 seconds, then when it came back to the level, I was facing another dead end, and a pregnant humanoid creature being hanged on top of the right of the screen by a spine umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature belly was split open from the inside, as the lower part of the body was ripped apart and fell into the river below. The Blood Lake boss was revealed. It came flying towards me, making a shrill, hacking scream. I was forced to move back. The bat was highly mobile boss, fast and difficult to hit. As I moved back along the ground, the monster opened its mouth and shot out a barrage of needles. I jumped over them and managed to give it a blow to the head, and it started flying out of me reach. As the bat was flying, it shot a stream of fire from its eye sockets and started trying to hit me with the flames. I rolled along the ground, which drained my power, but put us at equal speed. This cycle repeated around 3 times, until the monster was defeated. With most of the health drained, I went back to the edge of the level, and the large brambles vines blocked the exit was now gone. Now only 2 levels left to go. Who to send this time? Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus? Had all completed 1 level, leaving Solomon, and also the mysterious 5th monster. I tried again to access it, but with no luck. I choose to use Godzilla again for the next level, and Solomon for the final one. The second to last level was what I referred to as the organic level, which was the most visually unpleasant of them all. Right from the start, I could see that the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding. With the addition of the loud and droning music, I was dreading what I would see in these levels. And it was only a few seconds before something happened. 2 hideous things. It's hard to describe most of the level. Everything had this disturbing semi-real look to it. Most of the enemies looked halfway between real animals and misshapen lumps of gore and teeth. It's also worth noting that all of them were considerably larger than Godzilla. And although the majority were not very intelligent, each of them took around 30 plus hits to kill. Due to this, it was a better idea to run away from them than fight, but it was never clear what exact direction you were supposed to run to. While most of the levels involving to go to the right to get to an exit, the path of this level was permanently going down by walking to an edge of the platform and jumping down to a lower one. There was no way to make sure you were going to the right way, nor any apparent means of getting back up to the higher platform if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware you had jumped down, and would stand at the edge of the lower platform waiting for you to jump. When this happened, I would have walked back and wait until the monster would leave. As I went on, I came across a platform stacked above with each other with little space between, looking like a maze. This meant that I couldn't jump, and it made escape from enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies able to fit through these mazes were four-legged beasts seen at the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty, there were long tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up between the platforms and trap you. The only attack they responded to was the heat beam, which would cause them to shrink back down. But this was costing even more power, and I couldn't afford to do without the heat beam for long. While trying to avoid the abominations that dwelled in this level, I found out that if you stand idle in one place for too long, the ground tries to absorb your monster. I think it was about 40 minutes before the end of the level was making me physically sick. Take in all the disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game and look for a bag, but I wasn't able to hold it together. I also found a trick at the end of the level, though it was too late for me to do any real good. If two different species of monsters run to each other face to face, they would fight each other other than leave me alone. I didn't intentionally cause this, it just happened. Finally, at the end, it was time for another boss fight. It was certainly ugly, but not quite as horrific as I feared it would be. But more important than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since I had less than half my health bar to start with, there was no more room for errors. It was attached to the floor when I first saw it, but after 10 hits it detached from the floor and began floating. It moved fast, and unlike the Blood Lake boss, he wasn't impeded by any sort of gravity. It was even able to fly through the ground without any collision effect. It used this to its advantage, and would float beneath the ground and spring up randomly to bite you. But it stopped doing this after a few well-aimed kicks to the face. The pink area on its upper jaw was a weak point. Too many hits there will cause to spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float up and down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to consistently keep its jaws aimed towards me. Health was getting critical at this point, and I spammed the heat beam from which it had no defense. In the last stretch of the battle, the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth and gashing its jaw. I had to duck under it, and then strike when its back was turned. 20 hits more, and it was destroyed. One last level to go, and then it was down to one last level. I didn't hesitate. I select Solomon and entered perhaps a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of the disconnect between what the NES was graphically capable of and what this game could create. The music also caught my attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once, the horrible screeching from when the Hellbeast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as I start, there was already enemy appeared to attack, a centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When I started fighting, several more centaurs appeared, coming from both sides of the screen at the same time. It was too much to handle. Solomon's flight saved me from taking too much damage at the start of the level. The centaurs follow after, but seemed to be unable to jump. After escaping the centaurs, I noticed a gap in the ground. While trying to avoid the jumping sword-mouth enemies in mid-flight, I got close to the surface of the lava, and the creature emerged and tried to grab me. It didn't succeed, but I was startled. Carefully maneuvering would be needed to avoid instant death here. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of the trouble came from the stocky red demons that stood on top of a tall, narrow mountain and spewed fire. I got by them by waiting till their back was turned and hitting them with a flying kick, which made them fall into the lava. It was at this time I noticed that I wasn't gaining any health from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to a small chunk of slowly drifted towards the right. Some of them would sink into the lava upon landing on them, and there was no way to tell which one would sink and which would not. Being so close to the lava added the threat of lava creatures, and this was very frustrating. I was also feeling very hot, which made me concentrate harder. If you ever had a heat rash, it felt similar to that. I had periodically stopped from water because of it. This was almost certainly due to the game and not my imagination, but I kept pushing throughout the whole out of my head. I didn't want to think about it. At the end of the stage, I encounter a boss rising from the lava. It a rival noted with a ungodly howling roar. When it walked on land, I saw how gigantic it was. It was several times the size of Solomon. I was about to fly up and attack when it opened its mouth and let out a huge blast of fire. I had to fly to dodge the flames, and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam at its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, it would have kept moving left until it forced Solomon to the lava. As there was no more ground within reach, the beast had to wait between using of its fire breath, and it seemed to cause a great deal of energy. I used this time to attack it, but the fire wasn't its only weapon. Add too wary of the monster swatting at me with its claw hands. As its health decreased, it moved faster, and the battle felt like a tug-of-war between two monsters over the bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling backwards into a lava from whence it came, and then the final stage had been completed. At last, it was down to the two bosses and a final encounter with the Hellbeast. For some reason, I thought Ghidorah would be easier to beat, so I confronted him first. The classic Ghidorah battle. Music from the original started up. I was facing against the King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful, unrelenting as ever. He instantly lashed out with the gravity beam, which more damaging than the Godzilla's heat beam. It became a struggle of consistently beating Ghidorah at every opportunity kept him from using the attack. But Ghidorah soon saw my tactics and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each of his necks, knocking me backwards and making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. But I had an idea: to wait for him to lunge with one of its heads and then immediately blast it with the heat beam. It worked, and to my surprise, the heat beam had actually obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds before I realized that this would lead to, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform into Mega King Ghidorah. But what really shocked me was the sudden change of music. I heard it before, but it wasn't from the original NES game. It was from the game Super Godzilla during the Mecha King Ghidorah fight. Mecha King Ghidorah first attack was its most deadly, the machine hand, very similar to Gigan Saw. It immobilized the monster and rapidly drains the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer had ran out. I would need to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah quickly to prevent him from using the machine hand, so I sent Solomon to fight him. The two monsters were evenly matched in strength, but Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, the cyborg monster soon met its end. With Ghidorah defeated, I returned to the board. I now outnumbered the enemy by 4 monsters to 1, and victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood red color. I could feel the hatred emitting from it. I started the fight against Destroya, which with Anguirus, and the music was the same as Ghidorah's. When the fight began, Destroya was in a microscopic form. After one hit, it changed into a juvenile, which had a few attacks, was also dealt with easily. The fight became serious once Destroya entered the Irradiate form, gaining the use of its large arms and micro-oxygen beam. Anguirus rolled back, which had been very useful up till now, was rendered useless by Destroy consistently attacking me with its long arms when I tried to use it. For this part of the fight, I relied on brute strength. Just before the timer ran out, Destroyer had changed into his flaming form, which Anguirus was ill-suited to fight against. Going back in, I fought against the flying form Mothra, which seemed fitting. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was much better equipped to dodge the counter-flying Destroyer's attacks, so the fight was in my favor. However, Mecha Ghidorah fight music started playing. The Destroyer changed into its final form sooner than expected, which drastically turned the tables. Mothra's attacks were doing very little to Destroyer, and I had to move furiously to avoid damaging while waiting for the timer to run out. Even though it would near impossible to beat Destroyer with Mothra, I had 3 other monster final from Destroyer, was very resistant to take damage, and heavily armored foe would be not defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, I wasn't using much strategy. I was attacking as brutally and as fast as I could. One of the last bar of health, Destroyer tried one last counterattack, a beam energy from its chest. I don't know how powerful it would be, but because just before it could fire, I punched Destroyer in the chest cavity, destroying him. And then that was it. The last kaiju boss was gone. In the midst of all the excitement, I had briefly forgotten that there was still one last thing to do before the game would be over. Seeing the icon again hit me like a ton of bricks, and I froze a few minutes. I had come so far to get to this point, but I was terrified. I really did not want to know what was the last encounter was going to be like. Before I could get myself thinking about any of this any longer, I moved Godzilla over to begin the stage fight. You're now here. This is the end. Just one last thing and then it's all over. And when the screen changed, there was nothing. Just Godzilla and a black screen. I walked back and forth and tried to find any way out, fired a heat beam, nothing happened until I heard something. The faint sound of a familiar drum.
Chapter 8, Final.
Oh dear God. That was my first thought on realizing I would have to fight Red, the creature that tormented me through nearly the whole game. How would I be able to fight something that can kill with one touch? It seemed totally impossible. Thankfully, Red was no longer able to deliver one-hit kills, but despite that, this was still one of the most difficult battles I've ever faced in this game, or otherwise it had any real comprehension of what I was getting into before I started the fight. I would never had done it. I very soon learned what a horrible mistake I had made. Red reached out and clawed at Godzilla, and when those claws cut through him, I felt it. I knew it's common for games to cringe up when their video game character gets hit or loses a life, but this was not that. This was genuine physical pain. When the pain struck me, I paused the game. I hadn't suffered any actual injuries, but it felt just like my shoulder had just been clawed through. I had seen and experienced many unpleasant things at this point, but the game is causing me real pain. Where I drew the line, yes, I would be disappointed that I wouldn't get to see the end, But the risk was no longer worth it. I was about to get up to take one last screenshot and turn off the NES when I realized something else. I couldn't get up! I was paralyzed to my seat. The only muscles I could move were my fingers and my thumbs. And as the terror set in, a new message appeared on the screen.
You're not leaving.
I started to scream, but only a weak choking sound came out of it. I desperately tried to get my body to move, but it did nothing. I was looking in every direction, and then I looked over at the computer. Somehow the computer was taking screenshots of the game on its own when I began to fight. I still don't know how or why. Something in the game must have been causing it. Since Red could hear what I was saying, I tried begging for him to let me go. From here, the thing started to get hazy, and I was under extreme stress at the time. But from what I can remember, I said, I'm sorry I insulted you. I didn't mean it. I didn't know this thing would be this serious. Please let me go. If you let me go, I promise I would never turn to anyone or tell anyone about the game. Ever. Please.
You're pathetic one. It's too late now.
Only one will survive. This statement could not be any more clear. If I couldn't kill Red, then he would kill me. Like any idiot, I had to play around with something I didn't understand. And now it might cost me my life. I stopped struggling to move and accepted the reality of the situation. There was only one way out of this alive. I had to kill Red! It all went so fast. If it weren't for all the screenshots, I might not remember any of this. Just like on the chase level, Red moved at a horrifyingly fast speed. There was barely enough time to process thought. And thus, there was no time for strategy. I had to rely solely on my wits and reflexes. To make things worse, there was no way to protect what kind of thing the Red might use. So I had consistently had to be on my offense and defense. I felt every hit that Godzilla took. They all hurt. I tried so hard to avoid the damage, but every attack that I dodged left me vulnerable to another, and the pain would only get worse. After he jumped over me, Red's eyes started to glow, and I moved as far back as I could, ducked, but there was no dodging this one. When this hit me, I really did scream. I screamed so loud that someone else in the apartment should have heard me, but they didn't. Just looking at the image hurt me, making me remember the incinerating bird. I paused the game because it hurt so bad, but Red unpaused the game to attack me again, which made me furious. I immediately counterattacked with Heat Beam, again and again until the power meter was totally diminished. I wanted Red to hurt like I did. Just before the timer ran out, Red transitioned into his swimming form, and I didn't think the timer would still be affected at the battle like this. I'm thankful for it, but it gave me a few minutes to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. I choose to fight Red's next two forms with monster I had encountered with them. So Ungerus was next. It probably wasn't at all a smart idea, but it's what I did. I jumped up and heat beamed Red in the face, and he moved off screen where I couldn't reach him. Then wave of large mines starting to fall above. I felt this was unfair, so I shouted, "If you're going to cheat, then why don't you even let me use the controller?"
Can't break the rules.
And then he came at me, rushing from the top left of the screen downward. Damn it! Now I wouldn't be able to use where his next attack would be coming from. Red continued to strike from random angles. I consistently moved to swerve around him. Another 40 seconds went by and Ungerus was nearly gone, but together we had forced Red into his flying form so that it was Mothra's turn next. Deciding to fight Red with Mothra was a terrible idea. Mothra was instantly overwhelmed by Red, and the life meter was devastating in a mere 15 seconds. And once Mothra's life was down to 2 life bars, Red did something I didn't see coming. He reached out, grabbed Mothra, and ate her. After Mothra was devoured, I felt agonizing pain, like crushing to death. Mothra had been killed for my stupidity, and I would share the pain. It was a short transition from the battle to the board, but it felt like an hour. The pain combined with being unable to move was driving me insane. I wanted so badly for this to end. I never wanted anything so much, but I still had hope. There was only one monster left that could be brought to full health by engaging Red's battle, Solomon. If any of them had any chance to save my life, now it would be him. Solomon apparently had some history with Red, as when the fight started, this dialogue happened.
Traitor, I always hated you. You can die like the rest. I'd rather die than serve you.
Red took me by surprise again by immediately burning me with the demonic fire for a second time. As much as it hurt, it actually worked to my advantage since Solomon started at full health. He still had some to spare, but now Red had used all of its energy and could not use its ultimate weapon no longer. Now he would die. As he drew close to the end of the life bar, Red turned his whole body and face into the screen, flew upwards, then slamming back down in an attempt to crush Solomon. When that failed to work, he tried to devour Solomon like he did Mothra. But he wouldn't be eating my monster this time. I thought I had won, but something was wrong. Red was sinking to the bottom, and I still couldn't move. Red was still alive.
I'm not done with you.
After his seeming defeat by Solomon, Red had reconstructed his body into a gigantic final form, transporting us to a blazing inferno in the process. It was reminiscent in our first encounter, except now the scenery, much like the true power of Red, had become very real. The music had interrupted into a loud blurring sound, and a furious drum of death. Faced against Red's insane amount of health, my own demise was imminent. Solomon was my strongest monster, but not even he stood a chance. It was like trying to fight a mountain. Within seconds, Solomon was overpowered and dropped to the floor. When Red crushed him to death underneath his foot, the sadistic demon took his time as he snapped Solomon's vertebrae and ribs like dry brittle twigs. I couldn't tell he was enjoying our pain.
You're weak. Your monsters are weak. You'll die.
This is hopeless. I'm a dead man. I had no choice but to send another monster to its death. We were all going to die. I only hoped they would forgive me. After decreasing Red's health by a minuscule amount, Angress was also obliterated. Red unleashed a hell-blazing hot needles into his face and collapsed. Another moment of unspeakable agony, then nothingness as my ally faded away.
You can't win, Zachary.
I asked Red how he knew my name, and then he said it.
I've known you for a very long time. I'll tell you a secret. I killed Melissa.
For a year, she was being tortured by something nobody understood. Now I knew what it was. Now I understood why I was mocked about Melissa's death, and how the game knew about it, because he knew about it. He was the one responsible, and this time he was going to kill me.
Send your last monster. I will end this futile struggle.
I was taken back to the board to send Godzilla to his final stand. Barely anything was left of the screen board. Just Godzilla and Red's icon and the fifth monster. In the midst of everything that was happening, I had completely forgotten about it. I tried yet again to select it. I cursed, I begged, I screamed at it to do something, anything to help me. To no avail. There was only one thing to do. I knew Godzilla didn't stand any more of the chance than the rest did. But maybe, now that all the other monsters were gone, the fifth monster might finally awaken. I managed to get the Centaur's icon selected, and I pressed A as fast as I could. The icon started to shake, as if it was trying to desperately move. It was then that the Red decided he was done playing fair, and before I could activate the monster, he went for killing blow, paralyzing my heart. My hands started to become numb and feeling, but even as my vision was fading away, I still tried to press the A button. Red surely was breaking one of the rules, but he must have thought that if he could kill me quickly, then it would be too late for any consequence to matter. He would have won. He was wrong. Red's power was being challenged by another force. It prevented him from killing me, and when I regained my vision, I saw a familiar sight.
Zack, we don't have much time.
Who are you?
You already know me. I'm Melissa.
What? How is that possible? Red told me that he killed you.
It's true. Even after death, he tortures me. If you can't stop him, he'll do the same to you.
But how will I be able to stop him now?
I can't fight Red, but there is one who can. I will release him from Red's grasp. Don't give up. I love you.
My words stirred something inside of me. I wasn't going to die like this. And I had more to fight her for more than just my own life. I had to fight to save Melissa and the world she inhabits. With her help, the fifth monster was finally unleashed.
Acus, the golden light.
It was time to end this once and for all. Together we would take the damn hellspawn out of existence.
I can't save you.
Acus was by far the strongest playable monster of the game. He had to be, if we were to have any chance of surviving his punches involving turning his hand into a blades, which caused tremendous damage, but Red had more than enough life to spare. In the end, this would come down to pure skill. One final strike, Red was destroyed. His body disintegrated and sank below, accompanied by a soar of triumph music. Slowly, the paralysis wore off, and I was able to stand up again. We'd done it! Melissa's death had been avenged, and I felt overwhelming happiness until I remembered all the deaths and pain that led up to this point. All the other monsters who had fought and died. I was about to mourn for them, but the game had yet to concluded. Tears of joy steamed down my face, and I broke out crying. I cried harder than I have in several years, maybe in my whole life. All I had been through, and all I've discovered, and now the game was coming to an end. But before she and the other left, Melissa had something to tell me.
You saved us. We are forever grateful. We'll be together again someday.
The Prologue.
I am Zachary. At the time I write this, it has been 3 weeks since the fateful night when I played the NES Godzilla game. Going back to the night to immediately after I turned off the NES, once I was able to start walking around again, The first thing I did was unplug the NES, take out the cartridge, and put them in separate sock drawers. I looked over at the computer. All the screenshots you've seen in the story were saved. I backed up all the images on a flash drive before I turned off the computer. Just a case after that, I hit the bed, instantly passed out. It was not a restful sleep, but one complete exhaustion. It felt like no time has passed before I woke again. And what a day that was. The first I thought recalled coming to this mind was, what the hell happened last night? I thought for a short while, it occurred to me to contact the person I got the game from to begin with Billy, so I called him up. I told him to just come over to my apartment, which he did. I showed him the screenshots and gave him a very basic summary of what had happened. At first, he thought I was pulling a joke on him, and soon realized that I was not the case. Once it hit him that this was real, he made it clear that he had absolutely no tamperment with the game, and had no idea about any of this. So, then, the obvious question was to ask Billy, where did you get the game from? I got a simple answer. Another friend of mine that I trade games with. He assured me that this was a trustworthy person, and he had never had any issues with the game he got from him before. So Billy called him, and when he told this guy about the story, he was shocked and surprised as to anyone's expect. He abruptly hanged up on us. This was clearly not going anywhere. Before Billy left that day, he asked me if I wanted him to take the cartridge and dispose of it. I sharply declined. He asked how could I possibly still want to keep this thing. I told him that I needed time to think it over. And that was what Billy and I haven't talked much since, even though I've told him this isn't the case. I get the impression that Billy thinks what happened with the game is his fault. After he left that day, I did a lot of thinking. It was very hard for me to do any of this. Really, I couldn't stop thinking about the game. There were so many questions. Questions that were left unanswered. How did she get there? Why did this all happen with this game? But one question that kept me for many nights was, Red said he had known me for a very long time. How? Ever since then, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. The game made me ask myself questions about death and reality in ways I never wanted to think about. I'm not too sure of anything anymore. Consistently thinking about it soon began to have negative impacts in my life. I just didn't care about anything else. At this point, by comparison, all the other day-to-day activities seemed utterly pointless. I eventually decided that I had to choose between two things: to play the game again, or destroy it. I tried several times to father then plugging the NES back in. Just touching the cartridge made me remember the pain I felt with Red. I wonder if perhaps playing this game again myself might cause something terrible to happen. I didn't know anything else about this game, how it worked. And it was too risky. I wasn't sure if I could stand around with this game. So then it was time for another option. Wanting to get the game fresh air, I looked at the game and drove it to the lake. Planning to throw it in, I got up to the lake with a cartridge in my hands and I looked down at it. I thought of Melissa, if I had experienced the game, was indeed genuine. Doing that may have been the only way this warp game might have saved her soul. Damn it! Once that thought came into my head, I knew that I wouldn't be able to destroy it, so I just sat down on the bench, gazing at the lake, for about an hour, ultimately deciding on a third option, selling the game on eBay. It may be selfish, but I promise, it had nothing to do with money. Nothing like that. I didn't care how much the title I get paid of this game. Believe me, it's selfish, but I don't want the responsibility of owning this cartridge anymore. I cannot dwell on this forever. The only way I could deal with this is putting the game out of my life. So this brings me to the main reason I created this summary of the events. First, it's record of the details when I remembered them. And second, is whoever bids on the game knows that what they're getting themselves into. I can't guarantee the safety of anyone who else plays this game, or what anything will happen at all. But to this new owner of the game, remember this: be careful. And if you feel the game is literally messing with you in your mind, shut the goddamn thing off!